Good afternoon. Now we're going to begin our program.
Welcome to today's Professional Development Educator webinar from the Library of Congress, Rosa Parks in her own words. My name is Stacey Moats, and I'm an Educational Resources Specialist for the Library's Learning and Innovation Office. I'm joined by my colleagues Dana Bell, Cheryl Letterly, and Kathy McGuigan, who will be helping me keep track of your questions and share resources via the chat box. A few housekeeping items before we get started. For a smooth webinar experience today and to save bandwidth, we will not be using video for our speakers. You will be able to see our PowerPoint slides, hear our voices, and use the chat. And we will be recording this program. We will serve this recording up to you as soon as we are able. As this event will be recorded, please note that any questions or other participant contributions may be made publicly available as part of the library's archives. Participants in this live program are eligible for a certificate of participation, certifying 1 hour. More on that at the end of the program. As stated, you will have the opportunity to talk to one another and the presenters via chat. As you do so, make sure you select all participants in the to box. Please try it now if you have not yet. While I'm introducing today's program, please use the chat to tell us your name, where you're joining us from, and why you joined us today. Again, please make sure you select all participants in the to box. And now on to today's program, Rosa Parks in her own words. The Library of Congress exhibition, Rosa Parks in her own words, showcases rarely seen materials that offer an intimate view of Rosa Parks and documents her life and activism, creating a rich opportunity for students to discover new dimensions to their understanding of this seminal figure. In this webinar for educators, you will gain insights into the life of Rosa Parks and hear from 2 educators on their plans to use related digitized resources with students. Session guests in order of presentation are Adrienne Cannon, curator of the library's Rosa Parks in her own words exhibition, Andrea Lewis, Educational Resources Specialist, also of the Library of Congress, and Dr. Valerie Kinloch, Renee and Richard Goldman Dean of the School of Education at the University of Pittsburgh. Dr. Kinloch is also Vice President of NCTE, the National Council of Teachers of English. So, without further ado, I am pleased to introduce Adrienne Cannon, who will start us off.
Okay, we are having a little bit of a technical difficulty. And Adrienne, okay, you should be unmuted now.
Good afternoon.
Loud and clear. You sound great. Thank you.
Okay. Rosa Parks, in her own words, is the first major exhibition of the Rosa Parks collection. The collection spans 140 years of family history and consists of approximately 10,000 items that document Rosa's heartaches and triumphs, her everyday life, her activism, and her legacy. Included are manuscripts, photographs, books, honors and awards, drawings by school children, and hundreds of cards thanking her for her work. The collection was placed on loan with the library in 2014 and became a permanent gift in 2016 through the generosity of the Howard G. Buffett Foundation. Shortly after Carla Hayden was sworn in as the 14th Librarian of Congress in September 2016, I introduced her to the Rosa Parks collection. Dr. Hayden felt that the library had to share the collection with the public for a much broader view. Thus, Rosa Parks, in her own words, was launched. The fundraising proposal for the exhibition was completed in the spring of 2017. Rosa Parks, in her own words, is made possible by the support of the Ford Foundation, the Catherine B. Reynolds Foundation, with additional support from AARP, History, Joyce and Thomas Moorhead, and the Capital Group. Development of the physical exhibition began in September 2018. The exhibition opened on December the 5th, 2019, the 64th anniversary of the Montgomery bus boycott. The boycott, considered a pivotal event in the civil rights movement, was sparked by Rosa Parks' refusal to give up her seat to a white man on a crowded, segregated city bus in Montgomery, Alabama on December the 1st, 1955. The exhibition moves beyond that single celebrated act of civil disobedience to tell the full story of Rosa Parks, the seasoned, lifelong activist, the woman behind the civil rights icon. To tell the story, the exhibition draws extensively from the Rosa Parks collection. Supplemental materials are drawn from the NAACP records, Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porter records, the National Audio Visual Conservation Center, and the Prints and Photographs Division. The storyteller is Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks' words are represented in the exhibition by examples of her personal writings on display, and quotes of her personal writings and her book, Quiet Strength, printed on wall panels that introduce each section. In the exhibition's 6 unique looping films, and in the prints of artist Amos P. Kennedy, Jr. The exhibition immerses visitors in these various representations of Rosa Parks' words, as well as photographs that she accumulated throughout her life, allowing her to tell her own story. The exhibition begins with a photograph of Rosa Parks emerging from a dark backdrop. A woman many will recognize, but don't really know. Half in shadow, half in light. Barefaced, without her glasses, but guarded still. Pensively peering at the viewer behind the barrier of a chair and posing a question, a quote taken from one of the manuscripts in the Rosa Parks papers. Is it worthwhile to reveal the intimacies of the past life? Would people be sympathetic or disillusioned when the facts of my life are told? Rosa Parks decides to tell us her story. The story unfolds in 4 sections. Early life and activism, the bus boycott, Detroit 1957 and beyond, and the final section, a life of global impact. The early life and activism section focuses on the childhood experiences that shaped Rosa Parks' character and activism. Rosa Parks was born in Tuskegee, Alabama on February the 4th, 1913, to James McCauley, a skilled carpenter and stonemason, and Leona Edwards McCauley, a school teacher. This is a photograph of her birthplace in Tuskegee. Rosa's parents separated when she was 2.5 years old. Leona moved in with her parents in rural Pine Level, Alabama. In this autobiographical sketch, Rosa recounts growing up on the farm of her maternal grandparents, Sylvester and Rose Edwards, with her mother, Leona, and brother, Sylvester, who was born in August 1915. Sylvester Edwards was Rosa's first political mentor and an ardent supporter of the fiery Black nationalist leader Marcus Garvey. Sylvester taught Rosa and his other descendants, as she says, never to accept mistreatment. According to Rosa, quote, it was passed down to us almost as in our genes. In the sketch, Rosa describes, quote, keeping vigil with grandfather to protect their home from the Ku Klux Klan night riders. She says, I wanted to see him kill a Ku Kluxer. He declared the first to invade our home would surely die. This when I was 6 or 7. None came in our house. Here we see an intimation of the feistiness that would incite her famous 1955 bus stand, almost 40 years later. When Rosa was 11, Leona enrolled her in a private school in Montgomery, the Montgomery Industrial School for Girls, simply called Miss White School. The co-founder and principal, Alice L. White, was a white spinster from Massachusetts. Miss White was a strict disciplinarian. The students were required to wear uniforms and adhere to Christian morality. Makeup, bobbed hair, jewelry, movies, and dancing were forbidden. Miss White closed the school the year before Rosa was to graduate. Rosa completed 9th grade at Booker T. Washington Junior High School in Montgomery. In this letter from Gladys Jacks, a former classmate at Miss White School who moved to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, she discusses her studies, mutual friends, and teases Rosa about boys. Timeless, universal topics that tweens and teenage girls talk about. So through this letter, students of a similar age are able to relate to Rosa Parks as a peer. Rosa left high school before graduation to care for her ailing grandmother, Rose, and after Rose's death, she went back to school for a short time, but had to leave again to take care of Leona, who suffered from migraine headaches and swollen feet. Rosa did occasional domestic work, but mainly tended the farm. In the spring of 1931, while working as a housekeeper, she was nearly raped by a white neighbor of her employer's. After the incident that spring, a mutual friend introduced Rosa to Raymond Parks, a politically active barber 10 years her senior. He proposed on the second date. Rosa initially rebuffed his advances. She thought he was too white, she says. But eventually she was won over by his intelligent conversation, his personal demeanor, his character, and his defiant attitude. They married on December the 18th, 1932, at her mother's home in Pine Level. Raymond was a charter member of the Montgomery NAACP and active in the defense of the Scottsboro Boys, 9 black youths falsely accused and convicted of raping 2 white women on a train near Scottsboro, Alabama. Raymond recruits Rosa to the cause. He teaches her how to channel her natural feistiness into constructive political action. And this is a letter from the NAACP records that was written by Dr. P.A. Stevens, a black physician and president of the Methodist Episcopal Church Laymen's Association in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Many of the Scottsboro Boys were originally from Chattanooga, Tennessee. And he is asking the NAACP for assistance with the Scottsboro Boys' defense. It's one of the first letters written in their behalf. In 1943, Rosa joined the Montgomery NAACP, succeeding her former Miss White School's classmate, Johnny Carr, as secretary. Under the leadership of Rosa and E.D. Nixon, a civil rights leader and labor organizer, the branch focused on voter registration and investigated cases involving police brutality, rape, murder, and discrimination. In 1949, Rosa restarted the Montgomery NAACP Youth Council and served as youth advisor. The bus boycott section chronicles the key events preceding Rosa's arrest and the major milestones in the Montgomery bus boycott. The section also examines the fallout of the arrest on Rosa and the Parks family. The centerpiece of the section are these autobiographical notes on yellow paper in which Rosa reflects on her arrest. She begins the notes by describing her arrest by two white policemen. She says, "I had been pushed around all my life, and I felt at this moment I couldn't take it anymore. When I asked the policeman why we had to be pushed around, he said he didn't know. The law is the law. You are under arrest. I did not resist." These are words that she repeated in print and film interviews, a familiar refrain that she writes confidently in pen. Next, she describes her brief incarceration at the Montgomery City Jail. She wrote in her book, Quiet Strength, quote, "I sat in a little room with bars before I was moved to a cell with two other women. I felt that I had been deserted, but I did not cry. I said a silent prayer, and I waited." And thinking back to that moment, she continues on the second page of the notes. I want to feel the nearness of something secure. It is such a lonely, lost feeling that I am cut off from life. I am nothing. I belong nowhere and to no one. Then she describes the personal toll of living under Jim Crow racism. There is just so much hurt, disappointment, and oppression one can take. The bubble of life grows larger. The line between reason and madness grows thinner. And finally, she describes the broader impact of what the criminal Jim Crow had done to one life multiplied millions of times over these United States and the world. He walks us on a tightrope. Little children are so conditioned early in the segregated pattern as they take their first toddling steps and are weaned from the mother's breast. Ending the notes on an image that evokes the special nurturing relationship that she had with children. Rosa writes the last 3 pages tentatively in pencil because she is revealing her vulnerability. In 1955, Raymond and Rosa reported their gross income at $3,749, considerably below the U.S. median income of about $5,000. They lived in public housing, but they were still able to make ends meet. On January the 7th, 1956, Rosa was discharged from the Montgomery Fair department store where she worked as a tailor's assistant in men's alterations. Raymond was forced to resign his job at the Maxwell Air Force Base. They never worked in Montgomery again. In August 1957, Rosa, Raymond, and Leona moved to Detroit, where her younger brother Sylvester lived. But they continued to struggle to find steady employment. In 1959, Rosa and Raymond reported their annual income at only $661. In the exhibition, we juxtapose the couple's 1955 and 1959 federal income tax returns to show their descent into dire poverty. In 1955, Congressman John Conyers hired Rosa to work as an administrative assistant and receptionist in his Detroit office. The position restored the Parks to financial stability. Rosa retired in 1988. Rosa remained active in the civil rights movement while living in Detroit. She was particularly inspired by the courage and conviction of the new generation of civil rights activists in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, commonly known as SNCC, and the growing Black Power movement. This is a photograph of Rosa Parks with Stokely Carmichael at a forum at the University of Michigan in 1983. In 1965, Carmichael became the director of a SNCC voter registration project in Lowndes County, Alabama. In 1966, Rosa joined Carmichael and other SNCC workers in Alabama to support the formation of the Lowndes County Freedom Organization, an independent political party which used a Black Panther as its emblem. When SNCC established an alliance with the Black Panther Party, founded by Huey P. Newton and Bobby Steele in 1968, Carmichael was named Prime Minister of the party. At a Black Power gathering in 1966, he proclaimed Rosa Parks one of his heroes. And she reciprocated her admiration for the Black Power movement, which evoked in her memory her grandfather's Garveyism. She attended a 1968 Black Power conference with Carmichael and other leading advocates. And during the 1979 and 1980 school year, she visited the Black Panther community school in Oakland, where a play was performed in her honor. She also continued to advocate for prisoners' rights. She retained her interest in interracial rape cases, which began with the Scottsboro Boys. In 1952, 16-year-old Jeremiah Reeves, a talented drummer and grocery delivery boy, was having a consensual relationship with a white woman customer on his route in Montgomery, Alabama. When the affair was discovered, she cried rape to save her reputation. He was convicted and sentenced to death. The Montgomery NAACP interceded. Rosa personally corresponded with Reeves and helped get his poetry published, but despite the persistent efforts of the NAACP and Rosa and Martin Luther King, Reeves was executed on March the 28th, 1958, at the age of 22. In 1987, Rosa co-founded with her longtime friend Elaine Steele the Rosa and Raymond Parks Institute for Self-Development to promote and direct youth as a tribute to Raymond, who died in 1977. Raymond had a hard-scrappled childhood. He was largely self-educated and orphaned as a teenager. He had always wanted to attend college, and one of the first programs that the Institute inaugurated was a college scholarship program. The final section of the exhibition, A Life of Global Impact, examines the legacy that Rosa Parks left behind and the impact that she had on the world. The photograph that opens the section shows Rosa at a Kennedy Center gala that celebrated her 77th birthday. She is shown with three old Montgomery comrades, activist Virginia Dore, who was also a mentor, her attorney, Fred Gray, and Johnny Carr. The 1955 bus stand established Rosa as an international symbol of human dignity and freedom. Her humble demeanor and philosophy of quiet strength were particularly resonant in Asia. In a letter in the exhibition, her friend and collaborator, physician author Deepak Chopra, recounts being touched by Rosa's bus stand as a young boy in India and the effect it had on his parents and his extended family, who shared, as he says in the letter, wounds of slavery and subjugation. They cheered and saluted the heroism of the black woman, Rosa Parks. Rosa also received an honorary degree from Soka University in Japan and had her books translated into Japanese. The 3 calligraphy strips that you see show her name, Mrs. Rosa Parks, written in Chinese, Arabic, Hindi, and Tamil. They're further testament to the high esteem in which she was held. In latter years, Rosa received numerous belated accolades, including 43 honorary degrees from colleges and universities. On September the 15th, 1996, President Bill Clinton awarded Rosa the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian honor, in recognition for her role in the civil rights movement. She was unable to attend the White House ceremony on September the 9th, in which 10 other distinguished Americans were recognized. She received her medal alone in an Oval Office ceremony. President Clinton later escorted Rosa wearing the medal to the annual dinner of the Congressional Black Caucus. The exhibition ends with the same billboard-sized photograph of Rosa Parks at the entrance. This time, the photograph is framed in 2 quotes. The first is a sort of self-epitaph. It reads, "I want to be remembered as a person who stood up to injustice. And most of all, I want to be remembered as a person who wanted to be free and wanted others to be free." And the question becomes, how do we break away from the intricate web of injustice to achieve the beloved community? Dr. King's beloved community that Rosa Parks scrolls on the most unique manuscript in the exhibit, a pharmacy bag in which she repeatedly writes the phrase, "The struggle continues," and also refers to Dr. King's beloved community. The last quote are Rosa's instructions to us on how we break free from the web, the intricate web of injustice. It is a rallying call to action. It reads, "We must have courage, determination to go on with the task of becoming free, not only for ourselves, but for the nation and the world. Cooperate with each other. Have faith in God and ourselves."
Wow, thank you so much, Adrienne. That was absolutely an incredible overview of the exhibition. I think I speak for everybody in that you just packed so much into into that, and we're really grateful. Next, I would like to introduce Andrea Lewis, who will discuss how she plans to use this exhibition's resources in her work with students as an educator for the library.
Thank you so much, Stacy. So what we have done is we have taken that incredible, just such an amazing resource and turned it into a webinar for students in grades 4 through 8. And the working title for it right now is Rosa Parks Freedom Fighter. So this program is hot off the presses, and so we are still testing it. Next slide, please. So what we do is we ask the students to become examiners of history. And we remind them that as an examiner, you must use what you know, even if it's your opinion, you use everything you know to understand what you don't know or what might seem very unfamiliar to you. Next slide. So we spend a lot of time using different parts of the exhibition so that we can become familiar with that voice of Rosa Parks. And this is one of those handwritten pieces of paper from the exhibition. And so we want to understand what she says. So at the top of this piece of paper, she tells us basically that I will risk my life to stand up and fight for what I think is right. And she's saying this at 10 years old. That's what she's telling us. So that early on. So this spirit follows her throughout her entire life. Next slide. We take time to travel back in time, and we go down to the mass meeting for the Montgomery bus boycott. And the reason that this slide is dark is because we actually do storytelling at that point in time. And we tell the students, you don't have to look at the screen. We want you to feel this in your heart, feel it or see it in your mind. So they can walk around their room. If they get excited, they can wave their arms in the air. And they can close their eyes and just try to imagine, because there were thousands of people at this meeting. So we get to listen to excerpts from the speeches of E.D. Nixon during the storytelling, and we also do just a brief portion of a very young Martin Luther King. No one knew about him. He was brand new at that point in time. Next slide. But at the end of that particular part of the program, we discovered Rosa Parks stands up, but then she sits back down. She never gets up to the podium or the pulpit and speaks. So we say it's a new day, because we discover, too, that the leadership at the time period for the Civil Rights Movement actually told her she didn't have to worry about writing a speech. And a lot of historians feel they said that because she was a woman, and that is something that is very true of the Civil Rights Movement. Often women's voices were shut down. So we write a speech for her, and the students finish this phrase in 6 words or less, and we listen to our speech that we have written and imagine her at the pulpit doing it. Next slide. And then what happens is, and this is when the students are beginning to change that role of just being an examiner, we get one of the students to unmute their mic, and they do this ending of the speech. And what's happening is that it's almost as though it's like trying on clothes or a costume when you go down to Williamsburg. But instead, what they're doing is they're trying on the voice of an activist, and they're beginning to speak for Rosa Parks. Next slide. And so what we do is we demonstrate that the words that we used, even for the ending, they come from speeches that Rosa Parks did. Freedom, equality, and justice, words that were very, very important to her. Next slide. So by the end, the students are advocates for Rosa Parks, and they finish this phrase keeping in mind someone might walk up to them and say, I don't know Rosa Parks, or I only know that she refused to give her seat up on that bus. Well, they can enlighten those folks, give them all kinds of stories. So now Rosa Parks no longer speaks for herself. The students speak for her. And now we hear their voices with this knowledge inside of them. So that is our program. And next slide. Rosa Parks, freedom fighter. And I thank you all very much. And I'm going to hand the mic back to Stacy.
Andrea, thank you so much. I got the chills when you said, feel it, see it in your mind, and can imagine the students participating in this and really just getting so much from this powerful message of advocacy. Thank you. Next up, we have Dr. Valerie Kinlock, who will be discussing her work at the University of Pittsburgh with teachers in training and how she might use this exhibition's resources with young people. So with that, Valerie, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Great. So I'm going to talk just for a few minutes in reference to Rosa Parks and thinking about teaching and teacher education, and ending with a focus on Black Lives Mattering. And I want to just reiterate what was just said in terms of examiners of history and being in a place of knowing, and also thinking about students as advocates. And so how do we begin to think about students as advocates as we also think about ourselves as teacher education advocates, as teaching advocates in the work that we do in our classrooms and in community spaces? I'm going to ask for the next slide. And so on this slide, I was compelled to include these two passages from Rosa Parks, especially as we think about teaching and teacher education. Rosa Parks said, and I quote, "I hope to someday see an end to the conditions in our country that would make people want to hurt others." And she said that passage in reference to a violent situation that happened to her in her home, and really thinking about the responsibilities that we have to work with each other, to think about the pain that we experience collectively and individually, and to attempt to think about the conditions in this country that would make people want to hurt one another, and how can we actually resolve those conditions as we think about justice for people. When we think about students, Rosa Parks actually said, when students come to the class and demand to be educated, education will take place. And it's this point here that I want to connect to the Rosa and Raymond Parks Institute for Self-Development. As was talked about earlier, it was founded by Parks and Elaine Steele in 1987. And in this wonderful book titled The Rebellious Life of Mrs. Rosa Parks, it is written that this institute sought to develop leadership skills in young people to bring them into the struggle for civil rights. The institute stressed the importance of self-respect, comportment, and education for liberation to Detroit students, and that Black history for Rosa Parks had been one of the great transforming discoveries of her life, and hence she wanted to also pass that discovery on to all of the young people who she met in the work that she did across her lifetime. I think that this has a lot of promise for how we think about teaching and teacher education, particularly in this country. Can we go to the next slide? And so Rosa said, "I'd like people to say, I am a person who always wanted to be free and wanted it not only for myself." How do we think about that notion of freedom as we think about teaching and teacher education? I think one way to do that is to ask ourselves as teachers, as teacher educators, as community leaders, as people concerned with the education of students across all grade levels, freedom means what? Freedom looks like what? Freedom must include what? What is it freedom for? And freedom for whom? And when we began to ask those questions and we began to tease away at the nuances of this larger idea of freedom, then we can engage young people and families and teachers and principals and superintendents and community folks in thinking deeply about freedom for what, for whom, and what does freedom really mean. And I think that's one of the major promises of Rosa Parks and her legacy for teaching and teacher education. And finally, the next slide. And so as we think about teaching and teacher education, I do think that this is also a moment for us to think about teaching, teacher education, and the legacy of Rosa Parks as we think about Black Lives Mattering. And we are in a moment in this country that is not so far removed from where we were when Rosa Parks sat on the bus, when Rosa Parks said we need to talk about liberation for Black people, we need to talk about coalition building, and we need to talk about the education of students, of young people, whether it was in Detroit or elsewhere. And we get to this moment, and the question becomes, how can the life of Rosa Parks help us to better understand the Black Lives Matter movement and the various protests happening across the world? And that's a question I want to leave with you. How do we begin to look at this amazing, inspiring person, Mrs. Rosa Parks, and the work that she did, often in obscurity, and really think about not just where we were, but how far have we come or how far have we not come? And it was Rosa Parks who said, don't give up and don't say the movement is dead. She said this many years ago, and we are still in a moment where we are questioning the relevance of Blackness, Black lives, and Black education. And so I think collectively, what I would want to leave you with is this larger question that's posed here. How can her life help us to understand this Black Lives Matter movement? But how can her life also help us to understand the ways that these movements and protests have to become a part of a larger conversation about her life, her contributions, and what we need to continue to do to improve the world for teaching, for teacher education, and for freedom. And so I'll stop there and pass the mic.
Wow, thank you so much, Valerie. That was just incredible. You've given us so much to think about as educators, continuing Rosa Parks' legacy in the context of today's protests in the Black Lives Matter movement, especially. Before we begin discussing participant questions, and I hope you'll continue to post those to the chat box if you haven't already, I do want to share some information for those who might need to leave right at 3 in case our discussion goes over. So before you go, please give us feedback using this link, which my colleague Dana is also sharing in the chat box. And if you want a certificate for your live participation today, please email your first name and your last name to me, Stacy Motes, and Dana, I believe, is also putting my email in the chat box in the next 48 hours. And unfortunately, after that time, we can't fulfill requests for certificates. So do please get that to me. We also hope that you will join us for next week's session on primary sources and information literacy. And again, before we move on to the questions, I just want to thank each and every one of you for joining us this afternoon, and especially just thank our incredible speakers, Adrian, Andrea, Valerie. This was just phenomenal. So thank you all. And now with that, I'm going to take a look here at what has been posted. So looks like one of our first questions a little while back, Karen asked, do you know, and I'm assuming this is for Adrian, do you know what is missing from the box set of the Medal of Freedom? Adrian?
What is missing from the box?
The boxed set of the Medal of Freedom. Not certain.
The box set?
Mm-hmm. Must have been from the photograph that we had of the.
Well, we didn't put the ribbon. We did not include the ribbon with the medal in the exhibition for conservation purposes.
Okay, so that may hopefully answer the question.
But if there's anything else, missing in the box, that we received it in the box with the ribbon and the medal, as well as the certificate from the auction house, Guernsey.
Great, thank you, Adrienne. Another question we received, and Valerie, I'll ask this of you. Do you know if the Rosa and Raymond Parks Institute is still open for membership?
That's a great question. And information can be found at rosaparks.org, rosaparks.org. And it seems like they're still taking donations. They have a list of programs. They have information about the Institute itself. And so I do recommend that folks do visit their homepage and really figure out ways to get more involved. I think when she created this with Ms. Steele, it was an amazing opportunity for us to think more broadly and expansively about education, not just being within a school building, but education across these different spaces. And I just think that the legacy of Rosa Parks could be honored by supporting the work of this institute. So it's there at rosaparks.org.
Thank you so much. And I know, I believe my colleague Dana has shared that link as well in the chat box. Andrea, the next question is for you, which I think you mentioned earlier, but let's just amplify it again. How can educators get more information on the program that you'll be piloting for the Library of Congress?
Since it's not quite complete, what we're doing is just taking questions if you just want more information, and then we're going to put it into a database and send out information. So they can use my email, alewis, Lewis, at loc.gov.gov.
Terrific. Thank you, Andrea. And Dana has also put your email address into the chat box. Well, this next question from Darlene is wonderful. It's a bit of a, might need some more thought, so take a second if you need it. But I think I'll pose it to you first, Valerie. How can we help students develop that intrinsic desire to be educated? And Andrea, I might ask that of you next, so if you want to think about that as well.
That is a great question. So how can we help students to develop an intrinsic desire to be educated? That's a great question. I will start by saying, if I think deeply about the complexities of Rosa Parks and what we tend to not know about Rosa Parks, yes, we know Rosa Parks sat on a bus. We know she was jailed. We know that Rosa Parks sacrificed a lot. What we also should know is that Rosa Parks eventually moved to Detroit and continued to work as a fearless advocate and activist and leader. And so when we think of the life of Rosa Parks and we think about this question about how do we motivate students, I think that we have the answer when we look at Rosa Parks. It becomes a series of conversations about how do we step out of the way and listen to the voices of our kids and young people telling us what they need in order to actually receive the type of education that they rightfully deserve. How do we listen? How do we take action based on what they say? How do we follow them into different spaces and places out of curiosity? And we understand that curiosity and play are fundamentally connected to education and to learning. And if all of our kids have a right to learn, then we have this unwavering commitment to pay attention to what they ask, what they say, and to make resources available. It's not just about standing in a classroom and talking at students. It is about being in community with young folks and being able to give examples, like the example of Rosa Parks, and to be able to say, so what else do we need to know, and how do we do this work with each other? I think for me, that's that intrinsic, that's that deep longing that we need to ensure our kids have access to exploring. I hope that makes sense.
Thank you so much, Valerie. Yes, that really speaks to me, especially as a former preschool teacher. Your comment about curiosity and play and just that need to step out of the way and listen is so important. Andrea, did you want to add anything to that about just how do we help students develop this intrinsic desire to be educated?
Well, I don't feel I think that was just a fantastic answer. But I think that one thing we're going to have to assume is that children do want to be educated. They do want to be excited about things. They love it. They eat it up. In fact, they tire you out when they are interested. So I think we need to assume that. And as Valerie was saying, that the students have to play a greater role, especially when you're a teen. You have to play a greater role in determining what you learn about. So it's more of a partnership. So I think that's extremely important.
Thank you, Andrea. And we actually just got a follow-up question, I believe, from Anne-Marie back to Valerie as far as committing to an unwavering commitment to what our kids say. How do we also do this work with each other? And again, thinking about your experiences as a teacher educator, helping others become teachers. How do we do this work with each other is what Anne-Marie is asking, Valerie.
Anne-Marie, that's a great question. How do we do this work with each other becomes the part that we oftentimes, in my opinion, don't talk about. Often we're talking about what it is that we have to teach, how we evaluate, and we're missing a big piece of that sort of puzzle there. And the big piece is we're not teaching curriculum, we're teaching people, we're teaching kids, and in turn, they're also teaching us. And so how do we do this work with each other? I'm going to give this quick example from the School of Education at the University of Pittsburgh. I started here as dean in 2017, and I came into this space committed to equity and justice and did not really see outright hyper-visible examples, except for people doing work in their corners, teaching in classrooms with the door closed. Someone else might not be doing the same type of critical teaching and engagement. And so I walked into classroom spaces. I had conversations with colleagues. I listened. And what I heard was, we want to learn how to do this work with each other, but we just don't know how to. So that's part of an unwavering commitment to doing the work. It is listening to where we are in terms of our thinking and our dispositions, and it's pushing ourselves and each other to do better. So we did that work, and we continue to do that work here, and we name it. We name it equity, we name it justice, we name it engagement, and we name it transformative education. And if we can't do that work with each other, my concern becomes, then what are we doing in classroom spaces with kids, with young adults? So that's a long way of saying we have to be able to ask ourselves some really hard questions about our commitments. We have to also ask ourselves about our views of young people and kids. I think we have to start by understanding that they are brilliant and amazing already, and that we are invited into their lives to further that brilliance and amazingness. And if we could do that with kids and young folks, then we have a commitment to doing it with ourselves too.
Thank you so much. Adrienne, I have a couple of questions here that I think are directed to you. The first is, what besides letters and notes are part of the collection? And also specifically as a follow-up, could you please discuss materials in the collection that relate to Rosa Parks' work with women, such as Reese Taylor?
Yes. Well, the collection it's varied in terms of manuscript material. We have fragmentary drafts of her personal writings. We have personal letters. We have family correspondence. We also have, in the category still of manuscripts, printed material, political brochures, and flyers. We also have a collection of labor buttons and political buttons from the 1930s, 40s. that we include in the exhibition. Variety of photographs, as well as albums and posters and original drawings. And you can see much of the Rosa Parks collection online. We were able to digitize it again through the generosity of the Howard G. Buffett Foundation, and with the consent of the Rosa and Raymond Parks Institute gave us copyright permission to post the materials online. You can see that online through the Rosa Parks Papers link. You can find that if you go to the library's main webpage, www.lsu.gov, and click on the Digital Collections link, and then look under R for Rosa Parks Papers. Then we also have, as you could see through the presentation, we have examples of honors and awards, which include the Presidential Medal of Freedom and the Congressional Gold Medal. And we have books, the centerpiece of which I would say is a family Bible that includes some genealogical notes. And then we have books that she collected, over 40, that reflect her diverse interest. And so it's a mixed, definitely a mixed media collection. We have some photographic albums. I should say phonographic records, and we have video tape recordings. Just a variety of different materials.
Thank you so much.
And then in terms of what was the other question about the
women's materials?
Oh, the women's material. We don't now on Reese Taylor. We don't have a lot on her activism with the NAACP, but we do have her personal papers were split between the materials that came through to the Library of Congress through the Howard G. Buffett Foundation, and then in 1976 she gave a collection of more public papers to Wayne State University, which reflect her activism at Highlander Folk School, some materials with the NAACP and other organizations, and you can find the finding aid online for that through Wayne State University. But we are fortunate to have the records of the NAACP. The Library of Congress has been the official repository for the NAACP since 1964. And so the item that we have in the exhibit that relates to Reese Taylor was taken from the NAACP records. And we also have some other materials that illuminate Parks' work with the NAACP and the NAACP records.
Great. Thank you so much, Adrienne. Again, it's just incredible how many resources we have available through the library. And I want to make a quick shout out to Adrienne and I worked together in the past on programming related to another exhibition that she curated, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, A Long Struggle for Freedom. And that is another exhibition available online through the library's website that I would really encourage you to look at. And I just want to quickly get to two more questions before we end for today. Amy had asked if there were any selected resources curated in an online format for our K-2 learners. And Cheryl, my colleague, had actually had a great suggestion that I think she already put in the chat. But one of our Teaching with Primary Sources program partners, Kid Citizen, has a terrific offering called Rosa Parks, a Proud Daughter. So that's one that I would definitely check out. And others might have others to put in the chat. And then Darlene asks, and I will put this to Valerie and to Andrea in case they have a recommendation. Is there a high interest biography that any of you would recommend for middle school students? Valerie, did you have one?
I'm sitting here thinking, I'm gonna have to get back to you. I can't remember the name of it, but there's text that I am aware of, and I've actually read myself that are available. I just can't really think of it off the top of my head.
And Andrea, I don't know if you have a suggestion or not, but again, I'm sure that our colleagues and participants have many suggestions that they will also throw in the chat. But anything that comes to mind for you?
No, most of my books were very young and in college age, so I don't have a suggestion for you.
I may actually get this title wrong, but there's a book that I really connected with and have recommended to students, Warriors Don't Cry. And it's one of the Little Rock Nine sharing her experiences as a memoir, and that was extremely powerful. Well, I think that we are just about 3 o'clock on the dot. And again, I just want to thank all of you for participating today. This was just incredible. And I thank our panelists for their expertise, for their time, and for the incredible thought they're putting into these important issues relating to Rosa Parks and her legacy today. I'd like to end with a quote actually from one of our participants, I believe, who wrote, "I think sharing materials from a person's life that correlate with the ages of students we teach inspires students to want to learn as they realize how real people struggle and overcome problems." So thank you all so much, and we hope that you'll complete the survey. And again, if you would like a certificate, if you could please submit that to me in the next 48 hours. Thank you.